My name's Cathie Kidger, and I'm just going to give you a few things to think about before you play. So when we come to playing our instrument, it's very easy. We just sort of tend to rush in straight away because we have a certain amount that we want to get done. But with that comes our habits and often an unnecessary level of tension to our playing. Whereas if we could just take a few moments to think about how we're setting ourselves up to play, then we can bring a little bit more freedom and ease to our playing. So if you're sitting to play your instrument, the first thing you need to be aware of is your sitting bones. So I'm just going to show you on my friend Frankie here. So if you can see at the bottom of the pelvis, we have these two sort of rounded bones here, sort of rocking shaped. They are the sitting bones, and if I just put Frankie in a sitting position, you can see how we want to be balanced on them and why they're called sitting bones. So the first thing is to just be aware of them on yourself. If you would like to, you can turn your hands facing upwards and just sit on your hands. And if you give a little wiggle, you should be able to feel your sitting bones, so two bony bits in your bottom. So once you've identified where they are, you can take your hands out. And you can just be aware of being balanced on them. Now, of course, very often we can tend to sit in a sort of collapsed way, and we're putting more pressure and weight on the bottom of the spine and compressing through the torso, which affects our breathing. Some people do the opposite and try and pull themselves up to sit up straight. But again, we tend to put more weight on the tops of the thighs rather than on the sitting bones, and then with that comes a tightening of the back and a raising of the chest. So just sort of experiment with where you've got the most contact with your sitting bones as you sit on your chair or your stool. Now you saw they were sort of rocker shaped, so you can think about how they are pointing down and they are supporting you as you sit. And then if you think about the spine, at the top of the spine we have our head. Now, without doing anything, you can just have a little think about your head floating off the top of the spine. So you don't want to sort of try and pull yourself up with a string, because then we're putting our head where we think it should go, we're creating more tension, we're interfering. But it's just a thought that the head sits very, very lightly on top of the neck and the shoulders. And you can just think of all that lovely space you have between you and the ceiling. So the head and the sitting bones are releasing away from each other. Now, as I said, it's not a doing, we don't want to try and do it. It's just a thought to help us to sort of keep our length and to sit in a really nice, tall, balanced way. Now, it's also really useful to think about the space around us and the space within our back and torso. So you can also just think of the shoulders softening and releasing away from each other, and a little sense of widening through the front and the back of you as you sit. Now, with that also comes an awareness of the space. So don't just be aware of what's straight ahead of you. You can also be aware of the space to the sides of you. And also, just know that you have space behind you as well. We can't see it, but there is space behind us. And all of this space is available to us to release into. So as you're sitting in that balanced way, you can really just allow yourself to expand in all directions. Now, it's also worth just giving a little thought about the feet as well. So often if we're sitting playing an instrument, we can cross the feet and tuck them under the stool or the chair, which then makes us, again, pull in and tighten the lower back. Sometimes, I don't know, some people might sit cross-legged to play, and again, there can be all sorts of twists going on and collapsing through the front of the torso. So, just to sort of start with, you can have both feet on the floor. Obviously, if you are going to be using pedals, if you're playing a piano or an organ, then you're going to need to be able to move your feet and have that freedom in the legs. But it's always worth, if you're playing an orchestral instrument, sort of having one foot on the floor, just to help you stay in balance on your sitting bones. And we often forget about the legs when we're playing. And it's very easy to tighten in the hips and to pull the legs up and into the hip joints. So as you're sitting there, again, without doing it, you can just give a little thought of the legs releasing from the lower back, all the way down, around the sitting bones, down the backs of the thighs to the back of the knee. So you're just sort of encouraging the legs to release out of the lower back and away from the hip joints at the front, just to stop them from pulling up and in, which then of course creates tightness and will affect the breathing. And you've got that nice contact with the feet on the floor. You can just let there be space around your ankles. So if you are coming to a keyboard instrument, it's worth giving a thought to how you bring your hands onto the keyboard. Very often we tend to lead with the shoulders, which creates a lot of overworking in the neck and the shoulder muscles. So first of all, it's worth experimenting with just the idea of playing. So no matter what your instrument is, once you are balanced on your sitting bones and your head is just floating up and you're thinking about expanding and releasing, just have a thought about coming into playing position, whatever your instrument. So imagine that you're bringing your hands up, or your arms, and that you're going to start to play. And see if you can notice any tendency to get ready. Now, this could involve a tightening in the neck and the shoulders. Maybe you start to notice that you're holding your breath, or that you're tightening the lower back, or pulling the legs up into the hip joints. There's all sorts of things that we can do without realising. And it's worth just taking a moment to experiment with that whole stimulus of playing your instrument and just noticing what it is that you do to get ready to play. Now, don't worry if you don't notice anything to begin with. It can sometimes take a little while to tune into ourselves. And we don't always necessarily know all the things that we do. But the more you can sort of play around with this, the more you might start to notice what your tendencies are. So just come back to sitting, being balanced, letting your head release, and thinking of expanding and widening through your back and torso, and the legs releasing out of the joints and away from the lower back. And again, just introduce that thought of playing your instrument, so bringing the hands up into playing position. And just see if you can say no to the tightening and the stiffening, or anything that you noticed that you did a few moments ago when you thought about playing. So we just want to see if we can leave ourselves alone, not let those habits kick in, and just continue to sit in a tall, free, balanced way, knowing that we don't have to tighten as we think of playing our instrument. And that's something you can play around with before you start practicing. Now, in order to bring the hands onto the keyboard, as I said, we tend to lead with the shoulders, and that might have been something that you noticed when you thought about playing or picking up your instrument. So it's worth just giving a little thought to the arms and the hands. So if you are at a keyboard instrument, first of all, just take a moment again just to say no to getting ready. Just keep thinking of expanding, breathing, really being aware of all of your space. And then you can try just bringing the hands up one at a time by sending your elbow behind you, letting the wrist pick the hand up, and then let the fingertips lead to bring the hand onto the keyboard. And if you do one at a time, you can really just take your time to do it. Don't worry about getting it right. But if we just think more consciously about how we bring the hands onto the keyboard, then there's more chance we leave all of this alone. So, rather than just bringing the hands up and already tightening the neck and the shoulder muscles, we're leaving all of that alone, so that before you even started playing, there is more freedom across here and in the arms, which can only be a good thing. And you can do the same for other instruments as well. When you bring your instruments up, just really being conscious about how you bring the hands and the arms up, whether it's the violin or a brass or woodwind instrument. Just really thinking about, can I leave all of this alone, and can I just let my elbows sort of float up if you're bringing up the arms to a height. Seeing how little you can actually do to come into playing position. And then once you're there, whatever your playing position is, again, it's worth just pausing, coming back to your sitting bones, to being supported, making sure you're still aware of your space, you're still thinking of expanding in all directions. And also just taking notice of the space, so the connection you're making with your instrument, thinking of all this lovely space you have between you and your instrument. Particularly instruments that you bring up to play, it's very easy for us to go to our instruments. So really think about bringing it to you rather than you going to it, because then often we throw the head off balance, we tend to hunch the shoulders. So if you are sort of bringing an instrument up to you, make sure you're bringing it to you and not going forward towards it. And then when you start playing, just seeing if you can still keep that awareness of the space around you. Remember to keep breathing, and just knowing that at any time you can come back to just pausing, being aware of the sitting bones, that lovely thought of the head being very light on top of the spine, really expanding through the back and torso, all around the rib cage, and letting the legs release out of the joints and away from the lower back. So even if you get a bit stiff or tight when playing, this gives you sort of a neutral to come back to at any time. I hope those tips have been helpful. Have fun experimenting with them, and good luck.